is going on, Secondhand Talent family? It is the season finale of season 4, and we are here with the one, the only Marc Janowitz, lighting and production designer extraordinaire. Marc, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Steiner. Thanks for having me.
Folks, now if you're listening and not watching on YouTube, first of all, go subscribe on YouTube, watch the video, check it out. But I got a little piece of paper, ribbon for the microphone there. I got something to say. Marc Janowitz has been in the entertainment industry for over 25 years with a robust catalog of artists, bands, comedians, and more with whom he has worked throughout those years. His path to becoming a lighting and production designer was, well, a direct path. When he was 11 years old, his keen technical and artistic ability led him to be enlisted to lead the production and lighting of his school play. The die was cast, and the story's end has not yet been told. Combining his aesthetic acumen with the practical understanding of production, Marc brings myriad of diverse skills that guarantees a unique and successful approach to each project. Marc's passion for design led him to become the founder and chief designer at E26 Design. For over a decade, Marc collaborated with the critically acclaimed and groundbreaking organization Blue Man Group, where he served on the design team for nearly all of their projects and special events wide. In New York theater, Marc was involved with numerous downtown and off-Broadway groups, including Camp Wanatachi, Kiki Baby, Moisey the Snowman, and Die. He's also served as resident lighting designer for the Forbidden Broadway franchise for 12 years, as well as resident designer for Theater by the Blind and resident designer for Bridge Club Productions. Finally, E26 designs the lighting and production for numerous touring musical artists, including My Morning Jacket, Trey Anastasio Band, The Lumineers, TV on the Radio, Passion Pit, a favorite of yours truly, Girl Talk, The Decemberists, and many more. Marc also has extensive experience with his so-called sweet spot, the 1 hour comedy special, including for Adam Sandler, Wanda Sykes, Sarah Silverman, Chris Rock, and at the time of this taping, Off with His Head by Hassan Minaj and Dad Man Walking with Seth Meyers, which just recently debuted. Marc Janowitz, welcome to the season finale of Secondhand Talent. We're so happy you're here.
Thanks, Steiner. Hearing that whole wind up, I thought to myself, gosh, should I actually do all those projects? So, so, some of them were a long time ago, I have to say, but thanks for bringing them all up, reminding me
Well,
how long I've had it.
we like to be holistic, if nothing else, here at Secondhand Talent. And just before we get into the interview, I want to give it just a sincere thank you to Steiner, my wonderful wife and production assistant, for all of her help this season. To my buddy Mario for all of his help this season, for Tenacious Toys for providing the lovely desk candy you see in front of you, to Mark Spusta for his shirts that we wear on this show, and to all of the guests, viewers, and listeners who have been following along on the show or who are just joining us. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. We love you, and we can't wait to see you in season 5. But in the meantime, Marc Janowitz, how is it going, man? It is so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, man. It's going pretty well. It's well, at the time of this taping, it is election day, so it's been it's an interesting day in the present, past, and future of America.
Yeah.
But in all of that, it's nice to just sit down and have a conversation sometimes about something that has nothing to do with politics.
Sometimes the eye of the storm is the perfect place for just to grab a cup of coffee and catch your breath, as they say.
Oh, I like that. The eye of the storm. All right, here we are.
Well, we're in it right now. Let's make the most of it. Marc, I gotta ask you for to close out for the last time in season 4. When we first met, under the circumstances under which you can go into, I would love to hear your spin on it. When you first heard the term or name secondhand talent, what was the first thing that came to your mind?
That's funny you should ask that. Um, I thought to myself, there's a lot of definitions of secondhand. I thought, does that mean like used up or used and reused? But I thought about it a lot. So since seeing the card and then our discussion today. Um, I think that if I was gonna try to put a definition or some kind of meaning to the secondhand talent, I would think about the second hand on a clock and how
Hmm.
yeah, that's what makes the clock tick. It's the talent that makes the clock tick.
Ew, I
54
love
seasons.
that.
Tick.
You know, 4 seasons, and it's incredible because I love metaphors. There's obviously 60 seconds in a minute. The first episode of season 4 is our 60th episode. So that's it's kind of cool to I was just thinking about that the other day. Man, what I love the most about this question is that I've never gotten the same answer twice. And the second hand on a clock, because it's what keeps it ticking. And it's the little
Yep.
bits that
It's small
all
increments. It's
that
the
all
small
add up.
increments, it's the little details. The second is the smallest detail that we deal with on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and it all adds up into the culmination of time, so to speak.
Absolutely. And speaking of things adding up in the culmination of time, I think it's worth noting how this came about. I went to go see My Morning Jacket for the first time this past summer, and Mark here, as we mentioned in the intro, does their lighting design and production, and it was fabulous. You know, we were talking a little bit. We'll get into it a little bit later, a little more about that show in particular. But I handed him my card and said, "Hey, thought it was awesome." And Mark reached out. Here we are. This is kind of awesome. This is pretty cool.
I have to say it took me a while to just to refine that card, then to remember exactly what the context it was in which it was handed to me. And then I thought, hey, let me check into this. I wonder, what's this about? If someone's going to take the time to um, seek out and speak to and speak about and talk about what goes on to make a show happen or make shows happen to make our experiences happen, then this is something that I would be, certainly interested in finding out more about and, having a conversation and seeing if I couldn't participate.
I mean, I just think it's really awesome too because, you have, I mean, at this point, closer to 3 than 2 decades of experience in this field. And one of the big themes of this show is to convey the understanding to our younger listeners that the love of what we do and the love of live music didn't start with us and it shouldn't end with us. And, to have someone who's a real veteran of the scene come on the show to talk about what it's like to be a part of live music, I think is really important, for any of our younger viewers and listeners watching this, or even people around, our age group, who are tuning in to say, hey, just hearing cool stories about things they might be interested in or might be pursuing to keep them going.
Well, and I might add or clarify that I think I've been doing this for actually over 3 decades,
Okay, all right, there we go.
which means we can do a whole section on how technology has gone since the invention of the candle.
Fair enough. So, I mean, that's true. We did mention in the introduction that your initial exposure to the industry was at the ripe old age of 11. Talk to us a little bit about that experience, very, briefly, if you will.
Yeah, of course.
How did
So
that happen?
yeah, well, I'm going to give a shout out to my sixth grade English teacher, Mrs. DiNapoli. And if she's still out there, I hope she could hear this. It was quite a long time ago, and I don't think she was super young at the time. However, Mrs. DiNapoli was the director of the school play at Lakeland Middle School. And if you were in her English class, you would be participating in that play. And I had no interest or really no courage to be on stage. And so, for those of us who wouldn't want to perform, we'd be on the stage crew. And so that's where I was put, in the basement of the auditorium, finding old theater flats and painting and stapling and doing whatever, getting the show together. And then, somebody had to run a spotlight. And so I volunteered for it. And I had to stand on a chair to reach the controls. And it was way at the back of the room. And I, my, my folks used to tell this story. My mom still does to this day. That while all the other parents watching the play, they'd see their kid come on stage and be like, "Yeah, that's my kid," and another person would come on and be like, "Oh, there's my kid," and the spotlight would come on, and my parents would say, "Oh, there's my kid." However, at one point, I was reaching forward to try to like change one of the colors or something like that. I'm standing on this old desk chair, and the chair flipped out from under me, and there was a
Mm.
loud crashing sound, and the spotlight went from wherever it was to up in the air, and everybody turned around and turned back, and somebody turned to my mom and said, "I guess that's your kid." And that was the start of what I like to consider to be a somewhat illustrious, if not successful, career in lighting.
I was gonna say, listen, if you're putting in the consistent effort and the good work, you're gonna be the guy that gets the call. That's just kind of, how it is. They want the person who shows up on time and fulfills the task as needed. So you just mentioned there kind of where I was gonna segue into, which was, kind of what were your next steps post high school? And you mentioned going to college for those studies. And I'm curious to hear about where you went and kind of what formative experiences occurred there that you took part in that you'd care to share?
So I would say probably by about freshman year of high school, I was uh, I learned that you could actually make a career out of production work, and so I thought to myself, "Oh, this is well, this is great. I'm kind of set, right?" And then I learned right around the same time that you can major in it in college, and I thought, "Oh, this is great. I mean, I'm just gonna go to school for something I already kind of know how to do, right? Because when you're
Right,
15, you think you know how to do everything." Um,
right.
and so I started, steering a lot of my decisions towards, I mean, look, it was my greatest interest, I have to be honest. So um, I ended up applying to a few schools that all had programs in theatrical lighting design, theatrical set design, lighting design, technical theater design, right? And I ended up getting into a couple of schools. I got into Boston University, which, to this day still is known for having a very reputable conservatory theater program, arts program,
Hmm.
design program. And so that was the path at the beginning. I thought, well, go get a degree in lighting design. Um, After a couple of semesters at Boston University, though, I started to realize there was actually a lot a lot more possible things to learn at university than just lighting design. And I think it was first semester sophomore year, I took one elective course in philosophy at a very fertile time when your mind is kind of
Yeah.
like ready to expand. Um, so I took an elective course sophomore year of college in philosophy, existentialism. My mind was blown. I went back to my professor, Sid Bennett, who was the head of the lighting program, who's still alive to this day. He's in his 90s and retired. And he said, I said, "Sid, I need to double major. I need to major in lighting and philosophy." And he said, "Yeah, no fucking way. You can't do that. You can't do that in a conservatory program. It's so you're gonna have to make a decision." And I we made a deal. We came to an understanding that I would change my major to philosophy,
Hmm.
um, and he would still allow me to take whatever classes I could work into my schedule in the theater design program. So I continued to take lighting design courses as a directed study, and then enrolled in the liberal arts part of Boston University, and really had it really was the best of both worlds because I got a really amazing education, like a really mind opening understanding, or at least the basis for an understanding of how how um how the human experience works, how the world works, we how we take in experiences, how we communicate, what uh how the history of not just you know countries and nations, but people, and the history of thought and the history of aesthetics, and how that all um, really sort of synthesizes and can become a basis for how to kind of live and have a life, right? And not that theater majors don't have a life, sure they do, but if you spend, at least for me at the time, what I came to realize was that if I spent all of that fertile time at university in one course of study only, what I was really going to walk out with was a vocational training, a very expensive vocational training. And it turned out to be the best, the best decision of my life at that time.
What was the because you spent, you have three kind of facets, I think, to your career, which are, the comedy specials, your theater design work, and obviously your lighting and production design work with live music. And I guess to rephrase the question, kind of what came first?
Right. Well, my look, the early exposure, sixth grade school play, it was theater, right? And for a long time, I was fairly convinced, in a long time, through high school and even early into college, that I was going to make my way to Broadway. That's the track. That's what, that's kind of how you go. You go into regional, you go into Broadway, maybe some opera,
Sure.
maybe some dance, but that's where, that was, at least in those early days, where I would have thought a successful design career would go. And that's what I was targeting. Um, but ultimately, look, a couple of things happened along the way that moved me away from that direction. And it's funny because I mean, look, it's been a long time since I have designed anything in theater or musical theater. And even like in the intro, you were mentioning things that I did downtown New York stuff, that's 20 years, 25 years ago. Um, I still love it, but it's not where the path has led me. The When I was in school, when I was in college, and there were some great bands in Boston. There was the music scene was hopping. I mean, it was the 90s. I would um I would go I'd go from club to club where bands were playing, and I would be like, "Hey, you want someone to do your lights? I'd love to run lights for you." And like, didn't know them. They didn't know me. Maybe I did. Maybe I knew, maybe it was somebody from one of my class, but it was just like I was I was drawn very early on in that sense, like my first transition, if you will, out of to where in my mind I knew there was something beyond that kind of theater track. It was going into those clubs, and it was flashing lights to the beat, and
Yeah.
being in those moments and getting in the pocket with those bands. And I mean, we're talking, tiny little clubs that had 12 lights in the air, and um I mean, no smoke machines, but everybody smoked, so it didn't matter. And
All
and
you
just,
need is a fan, and that's your smoke machine.
yeah, and so just like getting in to those moments and being a part of um that scene, really, it started to get its hooks in me pretty quick. And I sort of simultaneously, throughout those college years, would seek out every opportunity to go light bands and light music. And to the point where, a friend of mine had some lights that he was selling. Uh, I bought those lights. I would put them in the trunk of my car. I would drive them to place to place, sometimes two or three venues a night, plug them in, put them wherever I can, create a floor package, and, flashlights to the music, and really kind of hone a certain sensitivity to how that worked and how that worked together. Um, I don't remember actually making any real money at that sort of thing, but occasionally a few bucks, sometimes a few beers, even if I wasn't quite old enough for that sort of a thing.
Sure,
Um,
sure,
and
sure, sure.
but it was just it was it there was something very life affirming about that. And I look, I played music. I played the sax, right? I could move my fingers and create music. So I could translate that to moving my fingers and creating the visual space, right?
Mm.
It really one to the other worked it was a smooth transition for me.
It's
Um,
almost like a transposition of what you're doing with the instrument and just converting that over to the board.
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, so look, I loved working in theater spaces. I loved having a script and a director and collaborators and set designers who I could like paint their set with light. It really appealed to me. And there was a lot of satisfaction and still is in that type of collaboration, but it never really felt the same as you know that band, shredding and you're finding the beat. Yeah. And you could feel the bass and, you have those couple of lights in the audience and, hey, look, I saw concerts when I was in middle school and high school. I was already into lighting. I wanted to be that guy when the audience lights flash and
First
everybody's
concert,
like crazy.
first concert that comes to mind that you remember the lights and you were like, this is fucking awesome.
Uh, First concert I remember the lights would have been Billy Joel in late 80s, 88, 89, Nassau Coliseum. And right around that same time, I would add in Pink Floyd, The Momentary Lapse of Reason tour. Um,
Hell of a time to see Pink Floyd. Holy fuck. What?
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that
I'm going to see David Gilmour tonight, and here's a whole little side story that we can get into. But the designer of the guy who's been designing Pink Floyd since The Wall and continues to work with David Gilmour to this day, a guy named Mark Brickman, through a whole series of different channels and events and happenstance, I ended up working with him and
hmm.
as his associate, and he became a mentor of mine for years, and ultimately led me really in the transition professionally from being in a more performance art world into being in the concert world. So what a dream of mine, right? That, one of the first concerts I ever saw that
Yeah.
was I was blown away by the lighting. I ended up actually, getting to work with that person and having him really influence very much of where my career is even to today.
It's pretty true full circle if there ever was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so just to, accelerate a little bit our discussion of like my history of how I got to where I am today, so to speak, because it's long, so we can't hit every gig. But ultimately the Boston scene led me to be able to work at Blue Man Group when they first opened, right after they first opened in Boston in 96. And that 10-year journey with them from 96 to about 2006 was, I would say, really where my career, really built up a lot of fuel and a lot of fire. And, without that experience and a lot of other things that got wrapped up in that, including, moving to New York and being a part of that scene, like without that, I wouldn't be who I am or what I am or where I am today. I mean, it informed so much of how I kind of what I would say graduated into a more legitimate and a adult form, if you will, if there is one of those, of being a designer.
Yeah, and just to put a cap on that, I mean, I absolutely love the Blue Man Group. I actually saw them fairly recently over at the Briar Street Theater here in
I was
Chicago.
on the install of that show in
And
1997.
and I was on the stage about a year ago. They brought me up. I was up there for about 4 minutes. It was such a fun experience. And like it's again like it's just really cool. Like I said, at the beginning, for me to, be able to have these conversations with people who were formative in like the beginning of these experiences that continue on and then were formative in my own, career path as well.
Yeah, that one. It's funny. I mean, I remember walking into the Briar Street Theater when it was, pristine before we ever cut a hole in the ceiling of the lobby. That whole lobby
Yeah.
installation is gone now. But yeah, it was uh, you know, and people will say this all the time about how, you never know kind of which forks in the road are going to get you to here, there, and the other place. But that, you know, th that ter- let me back up. I'm stammering a little bit on it. The getting taking that kind of left turn, if you will, into that particular world was a life changing. It was a game changer in so many ways. So Blue Man Group, well, as a formative experience for me, um, that I was able to I made my stepping stones, if you will, into the concert world, the concert business from there. And what happened, make a long story, a very long story, a little bit shorter. Somewhere around late 2002, Blue Man was ready. They wanted to write a concert. They wanted to write like a rock album and take their creative work into they wanted to create a concert tour. They had a whole idea for doing something very much in their style, sort of a commentary, if you will, on the modern rock experience. And I had been with them for a number of years. At that point, I was already working, as a staff lighting director. And they came to me and said, we're looking to change up our design team and bring someone in who is very much in that concert world. And you seem to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry. Perhaps you can make some recommendations, and whoever we bring in, this is going to be the next person that you're assigned to, right? Because my role at the time wasn't to necessarily be a chief creative; it was to really help to facilitate designers coming in and facilitate their work and be part of the collaborative team and really be a bridge between people coming in and the sort of Blue Man creative way, right? And so I thought, well, this is great, right? Who have I always wanted to work with? And so I put together what I thought was a short list. I didn't know any of these people personally, but I had been reading about them and hearing about them for years. And the first person on that list was Mark Brickman, who had designed Pink Floyd, starting with The Wall and all the way forward, and had also, I mean, he'd been working in the field since the late 60s. He'd done Bruce Springsteen. He was, definitely like when people at the time and still to this day would think, who's the concert designer that they would be most interested in, or who's the one who's like been the most influential, right? I know I could see it in your face. You're probably thinking I'd say Chris Kuroda, but it was Mark Brickman, and Brickman was the guy. And
So we
he
talked about it before though. There's stepping stones in careers. Like it didn't start with Kuroda though. Like when I think about, Lighter, I also think about Candace Brightman, for
of
example.
course,
Like
yeah.
like I mean it does go back generations.
Well, and also when you think about and I knew, look, specifically at the time, I had spent enough time with Blue Man and worked with them on enough projects that I knew that they needed the kind of creative who could sort of ground up help them conceptualize a whole different way of looking, not just at how their lighting function, but creating a concert experience, right? Creating a true ground up, all of the different gags, all of the effects, a rock theatrical storyline, an arc. And, thinking about those big spectacle shows from the 80s and 90s, who would be better suited for that than Brickman? And so they called him, he called them back. They brought him to New York. We got situated together, and for the next 4 years, worked on doing creative work with Blue Man. So my first tour, my first rock tour, was as the associate designer for that project. It was called The Complex, which started. It hit the road in June or July, I think, of 03. And a lot of people, like, their first tour as a lighting director is, maybe a truck, maybe, smaller show. Mine was a 7 truck, 5 bus shed arena tour. And it was great. I mean, I was now sort of part of the driving team of a show that was the scale of the shows that I had worked on as a young stagehand when I was coming up. So it kind of came full circle for me then. They kept Brickman around for what became their next theatrical growth period, which included a show in Berlin, which is still running to this day. A show, we moved to their Vegas show, which I had helped implement at the Luxor. We moved and redesigned it, brought it to the Venetian. We opened a show in London. We opened a show in Toronto, and really created a template for all of their shows that they would do for like the next 10 years. So that was, a huge stepping stone. Meantime, Mark and I are working very closely. We develop a friendship, and he, and this is the connection. This is the bridge for me. In late 05, he worked on the concert film called Okanokos. He was called in as a hired gun by My Morning Jacket to do their main concert film, which was, incredible. And I remember he came back to New York. We had this office in an old Spanish restaurant that was above the Blue Man Theater in New York. We called it La Mancha, right? They still had like the horses and on the wall. And he's like, "Oh man, this band, they're the fucking real deal. Wait one day, they're gonna blow up. They're the fucking coolest." He couldn't stop talking about how great they were as a live band. Fast forward to March of 06. I had just left Blue Man's full-time employee. I was finally, leaving the nest, so to speak. They called him and said, "We're ready to hire a touring lighting director, and we would like can you suggest someone?" And he said, "I got the guy for you." And he called me. He said, "Yo, remember that band I was telling you about?" He's like, "They're going to call you. And I don't know if they got any money yet, but you got to take the job. Whatever it is, you got to take the job." And so they called, and he was right. At the time, they weren't where they are. They weren't as commercially successful as they are now.
Sure.
But I went in there and did, I signed on for 6 shows, which included Bonnaroo 06. And man, that was 18 and a half, almost 19 years ago. And I have been with them ever since. We, have grown up as humans together and as artists together. And it's been an incredible run. I do have to say, I was a little bit shocked that so getting on the bus with them was my second tour bus experience. And it was not quite the same as the five bus, 7 truck show. I didn't really understand that band and crew would be on the same bus, and I definitely didn't understand that everyone would be sharing hotel rooms. And it was a little bit of a learning experience for me. I had to I was yeah. I'll just leave it at that.
That's wild. I mean, and it's amazing how that happens. But again, it just goes to show you, like I've kept saying before, being that guy that gets the call, that you're the one that gets referred. That is that takes work and effort to put yourself into that position, and that's what creates that launch pad.
Yeah, it was you're right. And I think it's what I was trying to express before, and I wasn't quite finding the words when but it's just, I don't really believe in coincidence per se. I also don't necessarily believe that things are meant to be, so to speak, but there are ways in which wavelengths will just cross at these seemingly random, but not so random times that end up sort of becoming a whole different fabric for how you then like kind of move into. It's like the fabric of a magic carpet or something like that, that you just wouldn't even know it, and it kind of comes together, and all of a sudden you're like flying off in this other
Off on
direction,
the ride,
off on the ride.
talking about, taking the ride, part of my musical ride was this album that was, a few years into your experience, talk about what had changed over those few years and like, and then kind of go from there. Would that be
Yeah, that'd be cool. But you didn't see any of those shows, right?
I didn't see those shows. I was a broke college kid and I was also working a lot of shows and performing a lot at the time.
Yeah.
So I didn't really go to a lot of shows that I wasn't already performing at or working or anything like that because you know how it is. Like if you're working a My Morning Jacket concert, you're not going to another concert that night. It's math.
It yeah, it's really it's funny. The the it's tough to it's hard sometimes to remember that going to shows and having experiences, as I like to call it, going through the front door and being
Mhm.
part of the audience and experiencing what the audience sees on the show
Yeah.
side of things is really, it's a very important like reference point, and it's really important in sort of like having a better understanding of what it is that we're creating from the other side. Like what
Well,
is that intent? How do people receive and consume that? And what is their experience like? And to be amongst them. And it's quite recently that I've sort of not even forced myself, but just said it's okay to like buy a ticket to a show and go
yeah.
and experience it as an audience, as a punter.
But I gotta say, you know, I saw My Morning Jacket for the first time this past summer, time of this taping, summer 2024. And I would consider myself pretty well versed in going to concerts at this point in my life. And it was really a show. And one thing we talk about a lot, I actually was interviewing my friend Mike Palma, who's also in this season the other day, talking about running lights as a form of kind of jamming with the band and it being this like cohesive, two things happening simultaneously that make one whole incredible experience for the audience. And I really did feel that at the show.
Well, very cool. I'm glad that worked. I like to think of it as starting from the band and the music and the stage and kind of working its way out, like
Yeah.
emanating out from, even though sometimes we point lights at, the visual experience is an emanating out experience.
Well, one of the things that, speaking exactly of which, so this was the Rose on the River show,
Yes.
and you really took full advantage of the cityscape that you had behind you, and and as a Chicago native, it was really cool to see those lights playing out beyond the venue, because if you know, you know where to look.
Right, right.
And that was again, part of what made the experience so great for me was like seeing the way that, use the whole animal, so to speak, when it came to the
Right.
venue. Like
Well,
not
interesting,
just,
Steiner, because the booth that I was in didn't really allow me to see what was behind. Um, However, I know from other experiences, especially in urban environments, that the lights from the stage shooting out over will often find bits of buildings, and occasionally, sometimes I'll even point a light into a window on purpose, kind of thing, just for fun. Make sure everybody's getting the experience up there in the buildings, or trying to sleep at night.
just to
Um,
remind you that the show's happening.
Oh, that's right. That's right. In case you couldn't hear it. The interesting thing about the Rose in the River Festival and any kind of festival environment, as a touring band walking into those places, you don't necessarily bring your whole lighting package in. We didn't have
Hmm.
our whole lighting package in. You kind of inherit to a certain degree what the festival stage is providing for you, and
Hmm.
then you get to do some customization and bring in what we call the floor package, which is the lights that kind of come in, sit around the band on the floor on stands and stuff like that. Which tends to be in a lot of situations, especially for acts that are touring in, a myriad of kind of different environments, the floor package, so to speak, is what's the most customized, right? It's the thing that's going to be, in and over the shoulder in kind of in their world, right? Helps to create that environment. So I guess what I'd
Well,
say is
another
make sure you come back for a My Morning Jacket headline show in our
well,
own venue.
what I was just gonna say is that, in my experience as well, in addition to festivals, there are certain venues that just can't handle some of the equipment that, because it's an older or a more historic venue or whatever the case may be, where certain equipment is too heavy to hang, whether it be an outdoor theater that's been around, since the mid 20th century, or just an older building in general, you can't always accommodate the full set.
Sure, sure. There's a like in Chicago, for instance, the Chicago Theater, which is a, obviously well-known place. You've probably been there a number of times. I've been there a number of times. Um, you
For
wouldn't
this
really know.
tour, for this tour right here,
Yeah,
Trey
yeah.
Anastasio band.
I caught that shirt. I was looking at that.
That
I was
was, yeah.
looking
I
um,
was trying to think what was appropriate.
it's a that stage is very shallow. You wouldn't really know
Yeah.
it, but it's what we would call a truncated depth. So
Hmm.
whatever you would normally be using for kind of the depth of your production, you're going to lose at least 10 feet of it. But that's, part of the whole, uh, you know, what you have to do when you're, touring in situations. You have to be able to adapt and scale up and scale down and flex and, find the things that are the most critical or the most, really like that, the things that are really the essence of the design, and make sure you know how to kind of bring that in or modify or adapt it or substitute it, so that the intent of what you're doing is always maintained, that real core and essence. And it can be done in a lot of different ways.
So kind of alluding to what you were saying earlier, making sure that that foundational floor package, so to speak, is intact and to go at a minimum. That's what like you're making sure is rock solid every time.
Sure. And then also thinking about things like if you if your overhead flown rigging package uses a lot of very specific features of the lights that you might have in your design that you're carrying, on a touring basis, and then you have to move into a situation where you're using someone else's overhead lights or festival overhead lights, you don't really have a lot of time to go through and find every single way to kind of clone those independent features, specific features. So you have to think about, okay, what are, let's say, the six most important beam parameters, if you will, that I'm going to extract from this light and use in place of the light that I would normally use. Or, you might have a situation where you're using, 20 or 30 colors throughout an entire show. Well, you may only have time, or the fixtures themselves may only have the ability to recreate maybe a dozen of those. So, what are your 12 most important colors within that? And, you sort of find your ways into deciding what's important that day and what will pass.
And getting kind of back into it on that theme, uh, you know, 2008, 2009 is a really interesting time for My Morning Jacket. An album came out called Evil Urges, and it was a really important album for me. And I know you were a big part of that tour. And this is several years into, from being recommended as the guy to come on and be their touring LD. And I'm curious to hear kind of like what were those mid years like? What changed in the 2009 to 2012 arena, or 2000, or that kind of range? And how did you begin to balance that with you know being able to live like a regular life, and making it okay to go to shows, etc.
Yeah. Interesting. So, 2008. Evil Urges. That was actually that was the first tour that MMJ was putting together where we were going to have a truck, right? And like the that transition for a band from we have a bus that we're all sharing with a trailer that you got to jam everything into
And
now you're
there.
gonna yeah, and now you're gonna have right, and that's where you look in that in those cases you're, and this is what I say. I talk about this when I'm, I sometimes do some like college lectures on like concert lighting, and the different phases of your of a your progression as a LT often follows the progression of the different bands you're working with, right? And um, so as the venue, you start out where you're just bringing your space is limited, your budget is limited, your venue sizes are generally limited. So you're carrying, the smallest essentials you could possibly bring. When we were first out, we had a bus trailer that had to have all of their backline in it, had to have some audio gear, a monitor console sometimes. I don't even think they had a front of house console yet. And then I had I would throw a light board in there and a couple of strobe lights. I think I had maybe 6 moving lights and a hazer.
The
And
common theme in this season, by the way, is that folks like for just the average concert attendee understanding like what this means as far as being a tour manager or a road manager as I've been, or if you're part of the crew, like this is not insignificant what we're talking about here. This is a lot of stuff in a limited amount of space.
Yeah, that's right. And we were going into places, everybody had multiple jobs. Like I said, the crew was still, we were all sharing hotel rooms. I think the band was still sharing hotel rooms, in the '06, '07 years. And with Evil Urges, they were really starting to see some more success. Z had really gotten a lot of great attention. They were stepping up to bigger venues. We're now going from, we're going into places where you could carry, not only could you carry some overhead lighting with you, but you almost had to in a way because,
That's what,
you know,
yeah.
yeah, you're going into places that, maybe the club has some lights overhead, maybe they don't. Ultimately, if you want to have some consistent, visual picture, you need to bring it with you, and you got a truck to,
And
yeah.
in addition to having your own individual picture, is it kind of something, as you continue to like kind of rise in the echelon of the level of venues that you play, is it kind of expected that you or that a band would bring that level of equipment with them?
Um, I believe so, and this is something that I will sometimes speak to clients about, especially if it's a client who's making that transition from, let's say, that making that transition from one level of venue to the next, right? And that there is a certain audience expectation that the show is going to grow with the scale of the place they're going to. Look, ticket prices are going to be higher and there's more physical volume to fill. You're going from, when you're touring in rock clubs, you might be in places that have a 12-foot ceiling. You might be in places with a 20-foot ceiling. But within that, look, there's a lot less volume to fill visually. When you're getting into places where you're playing, more theaters where there's prosceniums and, some of the bigger open air clubs, for instance, the 2008 run for Jacket included their first headlining Red Rocks shows. And that's, and particularly for a band, we're using My Morning Jacket a lot as an example here because that's this, we're kind of following my progression with them right now. But, their live show has a lot of energy to it and a lot of drama to it and a lot of, what Patrick, the drummer, would often call going from a whisper to a roar, right? And times where maybe there's, it's, a ballad song or maybe just one acoustic guitar and it's very delicate, but then it could, they can explode with the next song, like something like Run Through, where it's such a musical and auditory, just like tsunami, that to not have a visual element to go with that, to have the sensory part to go with that, would feel like incomplete thought or an
Well,
incomplete expression.
well, as the lighting director and production designer, does that give an added level of pressure to you to come up with something that meets the level of the music that the band is playing? Or did you find it more so something that you were able to naturally weave in with what they were trying to
I
convey as an
Yeah,
experience?
I would like to. I want to point out it's not pressure. I wouldn't say
Mm.
pressure.
Well,
I think that let me. I'll clarify because I think that the point you're making, or at least what I'm deriving from it, I should say, is it to me it was like a welcomed, exhilarating, wanted challenge, right? Like, how are we going to express this in this new space, in these logistics, and do it in a way where, it would be create a natural kind of portal and a natural world and environment for this music to live in and to be, remember I was saying earlier how lighting wise, in music, it emanates from the band out. And so to create a visual scape that you can constantly be emanating and supporting and really augmenting how the band's performance is, to me, is um it's what it's all about. I mean, that's where I
so
want to be. That's the pocket I love.
so would you say that quintessential to your approach is to direct involvement with the band and their input kind of and working with them on what it's going to be and what the final
Absolutely.
product is?
Absolutely. There's in fact, to me, part of the process and part of what's enjoyable and fulfilling in the process is to collaborate with the band. Whoever from the band wants to collaborate in that part. Some want to be visually involved, some less so, depends. I look, I come from theater, right? There's a script, there's a story, there's a concept, there's some meat on the bones that will then influence and inspire and help to inform all of the visual decisions thereafter, right?
Mhm.
So that translates directly over to me into how you approach, a band's design for a concert, and having those magic moments with someone like Jim James or someone like Trey Anastasio, where you can talk to them about things like what what was in your headspace, what was in your visual plane when you thought about this music, when I'll say things like in the
That's
design process,
wild.
when communicating with Jim about how we're going to light certain songs, especially in the early days when we were, and when I say early days, the first 10 years, when we were still, I would say to him things like, if you can close your eyes and imagine any world or any visual reference or any color or any texture, taste, or flavor that goes with this song, when you're playing this song, what do you want it to feel like? What would it be? And man, anything that he says in that moment, I'll write it down, I'll research it. Um, and same thing. In fact, when I'm involved in a project where maybe the artist isn't as interested in engaging in that way or would prefer to engage through a manager or third party, I mean, of course, look, I'll still do the job, but I don't find it nearly as fulfilling because to me, it really comes from that early interaction and then seeing it go from the kernel, what I call like that kind of visual kernel, the things that we learn about in philosophy, and like
Absolutely.
letting it pop and grow and expand and all the things that can come from there. Look, there's many parts of the process start to finish that are my favorite. That's my first favorite.
You mentioned that, and I say all the time on the show that one of my favorite things about it is having these conversations, and I truly mean it. The conversations that you're describing are, for those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, my face as Mark has been talking has contorted quite a bit, just because I've been thinking of just some of these, like I would Oh my, to be a fly on the wall, that conversation of like what that visualization would look like with Trey or with Jim or with any number of the artists that you've worked with, to be able to discuss with them directly like what that visual interpretation could be, and then getting to put it into practice and execute it. I mean, you know, specifically with Trey, you did the Beacon jams, and that was a very intimate project. And I'm very curious what the interplay was there, and what the level of involvement was, because that was such a well, I'll let you take it from there. Let us know what the Beacon jams were, and then we'll.
Sure. Okay. So, Beacon Jams. Um, can we pause for 1 second? I
Yeah.
don't.
Oh,
I
yeah.
no no no. We don't have to pause the recording. I want to talk about Beacon Jams, and I want to talk about that process because to this day, and I think forever for me, I that will always be um, a just totally unique and special, meaningful, creative collaboration for a whole number of reasons, which I want to get into. I do want to step back to Evil Urges for a moment because um, the we were talking about finding that visual reference, right? And that kernel and the collaborative process with an artist of like um communicating and having conversations to help sort of extract from them those visual kernels. Like what were
How
they
would I
thinking when they made the music?
visualize? How would I visual like "Touch Me, I'm Gonna Scream" is like a song that I'm thinking about, or like just to I have my own visualization, but like to be able to have that conversation in the moment, and again, not just a conversation, but a productive conversation, a meeting, in which decisions are going to be made, and operations are going to be executed. Like it just fascinates me.
I think that you're going to find this little connection. I think you're going to like this little connection with Evil Urges in particular because there's a Chicago tie-in. Um, One of the things I will often ask an artist, and particularly I know this about Jim, is were you reading any particular books when you were in the process of writing or recording a certain album?
Hmm.
And because as you can imagine, oftentimes people, there's a through line to what people are doing creatively. And even if they don't necessarily intend to take something that they're experiencing in literature or poetry or something and express that into their own work, it's there and it finds its way in. It becomes an ingredient, a subtle ingredient or maybe a not so subtle ingredient. He was reading Devil in the White City,
Hmm.
which right? It was a
Yes.
historical fiction novel about the Chicago World's Fair, I believe in the
Yep. In
1890s,
1893.
1893. Right.
Yep. I've read the book a couple of times. Very familiar with
Uh-huh.
it.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yes.
So
Wonderful book.
you recall it's like kind of dark, right?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Dark.
Hmm.
And not just about, not just the murderous aspects of it, but also kind of dark in the sense of like just where the world was at that time and the kind of conflict with industrialists and and but also how hopeful things were, like the advent of electricity and the light bulb being used for the first time in that, right, the World's
Hmm.
Fair, on pier was all, it was the Ferris
The
wheel
Ferris wheel, absolutely.
and
And
the
I mean,
electric light bulb.
there were so
And
many components to that World's Fair that were fantastic. However, if you can trace the lines directly back to the however few major corporations own everything, had their first also major exposition at that exposition. So
it was the industrial age, right? And so
it,
there's a
it was,
historical aspect to it. Okay, so here's I'm just going to quickly kind of go back through some of our other conversation, right? So I chose to move away from studying theatrical lighting design because philosophy and and history and science really drew my interest. And I thought to myself, if I have an understanding of how to think and how the world is formed, how history is formed, I'll have a better way of, I'll have a better life and I'll have a better creative life. And so now, right, fast forward to what we just were talking about, you know, Devil in the White City. Okay, well, what did I do immediately? I got the book and I read it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
started to apply the exactly what you just applied in my mind to how do I now how to translate not literally Devil in the White City, but
Hmm.
that was certainly a basis. The concept of the album, some of the lyrics, some of the songs, the album artwork, which is for a designer a great place to go for visual inspiration, that all starts to click and make sense to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something that we can like hang our hat on. It's like the meat on the bone. It's something that I can go, reference visually and go back to, Jim and the guys, and they were all involved, but Jim is generally will usually kind of get into the visual meet first, and then we'll kind of start to discuss it, show some ideas with the other guys. So that, and they all read that book during the recording of that album too.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I think probably, I'm guessing, but probably because Jim was reading, they're exchanging like, dude, this is great. You got to read the story. I guess that's what people do when they're friends and creatives. So it wasn't necessarily that I needed all of that to figure out or to feel through how I was going to light every song, but it was a general approach to how I was going to formulate the production design, the layout, the physical space that we were going to create for the band to live in and perform in. And then what the kind of visual through line conceptually, song to song, like what could I always go back to if I wasn't sure? Was this gonna be a lot of bright songs? Probably not. Was it gonna be what did I use a lot of red? Yeah, there's a lot of evil. Yeah. Um, and so I mean, Touch Me Part Two, we could go note by note on that if you want, but ultimately, like that song, it has, these kind of like um synth sections, where it's like kind of spooky, and he's making spooky sounds with his little synthesizer or his little sampler that he walks around with. It's a song where Jim has starts off with a mic in hand, right? So different feeling when a performer, when a singer is going to walk around the front of the stage and get right up to the audience than
Yeah.
when they're going to sit. So I have that approach, which is brooding, dark, colorful, kind of synthy, like almost like visual staccato. And
Hmm.
then it gets into the section where he slings the guitar on, and it gets into the big and it blows up and it just face melts, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it goes
Yeah.
from there into what I like to call the psychedelic Pink Floyd section. Um, and you know, could I have and would I have found that through line to that song without knowing the backstory of why the album was created? Yes, I do think I would, because the how I sort of viscerally, visually dissect a song and how to light it is I use sort of what I'm going to say a different part of my brain, a different part of my sensitivity than when I'm figuring out how am I going to lay out the lights and the structures and the trusses and the clusters, and where am I going to put sources, and what is the production design, the layout of the lighting going to be for this tour, right? Are we going to have a backdrop? What is that backdrop going to look like? What are we going to convey on it? And right up until about a week before what I would call go time, where we had to make a decision visually, the set design was going to be a bunch of, it was basically the album artwork on the front page, which was all the World's Fair stuff cut into pieces and bifurcated and set in strips all around. Um, at last minute, I remember like final discussions with Jim about the thing, and he looked at it and he just, this, It's never too late to completely turn an idea on its head, right? And he said, it's too busy. Have you looked at the album artwork on the inside fold? And I was like, I don't know that I have. And he said, go look at it. And it was a black background with two jewelry boxes with eyeballs in them. And so that ended up being the backdrop that we printed in Houston State.
Yeah.
Um, but all the rest of the layout and structure and like the way the trusses got kind of segmented from each other and in sections, this sort of disjointedness all stayed together on that. Um, and
It's
you know,
pretty
we toured on
incredible.
that for a couple of years to
That's
two
pretty
album cycles.
wild how that all comes together to create that final product. Like all of these little bits and pieces that
Yeah,
are integral to creating the final result.
and knowing what it not every album has a concept, but a lot of them do, and not everyone has an obvious one. But perhaps the people who've created that work do have something that, whether overtly or not, mostly not, they do want to get those. There's some if the time is spent in making the sonic space and making the musical space, the the visual space deserves that time. And
Hmm.
that's how the world is going to experience that after if they've listened to it at all in their own home, they're going to go see the band. They're going to see a live band like My Morning Jacket, who is known for their live thing. And that's like the final straw, right? That's not the final straw. That's the final presentation, the picture. That's the thing that they're really going to experience with all their friends and all the other fans and all the people they don't know, but they all share this desire to experience music with. So to me, that's what keeps me going, and that's what keeps me juiced. That's my fuel.
Well, folks, we're not sure yet if this is going to be one part or two parts at the time of this taping, but we've been here with Marc Janowitz, and we will see you next Wednesday for the final episode of Secondhand Talent. That's podcast. All right. See you later.